Hello, friends. Good to get back with you again. You know, those of you who've honored me by listening to my thoughts over the last year and a half have undoubtedly noticed the real passion I have for history, endless fascination. And where did that all begin? Other than the very true old saying, if we forget history, we're doomed to repeat it. No, has its roots even before I learned that very true remark. In that, I think it dates back to the wonderful stories my father and my mother told us on our various travels. Endless, exciting stories about the people, men and women in history, what they were doing. And then when the Second World War began, 85 years ago, and we couldn't travel anymore, my father, after supper, many nights, we'd sit together, family, in the living room, and my father would read out loud wonderfully interesting historical novels by really good authors. While we women, wife, daughters, grandmother, aunt, would sit around knitting and crocheting. Now that sounds like a perfect Victorian home. Let's go further back. A scene in one of Jane Austen's books. And you might ask, what was this knitting and crocheting all about? Was that war work? Were we making things for soldiers? In every war up to the Second World War, that would have been the case. Sewing circles, say in the First World War, were extremely important, where women would get together and make bandages and knit socks, sweaters, scarves for the soldiers. In fact, the story goes, and I love it, one young woman hopefully slipped her address inside one of the socks, hoping she'd get an answer from some nice soldier somewhere. Well, a few weeks later, she did get an answer. The story goes, the reply came in this immortal poem: "Your socks received. They almost fit. I use one for a helmet and one for a mitt. I'd like to meet you when I've done my bit, and I'll never ask where you learned to knit." Well, I'm wandering off the subject, back to history. Yeah, what especially interested me, and still does, is those great leaders, men or women who rose to positions of enormous power, whether they were born to it, inherited it, appointed to it, voted in, or took it by conquest. What happened to them under these huge challenges of sometimes almost total power? What effect did it have on them and the people over whom they were ruling or leading? What effect was it having on their personalities? There's an old saying, and I don't altogether agree with it, that power corrupts. And absolute power corrupts absolutely. No, I don't agree with that. I've learned there were men and women who rose to great power who were not corrupted, who somehow kept their integrity, their strength, almost unblemished. I would say rather, and it's not original with me, but when I heard it opened my eyes to a lot of things. Power may not corrupt, but it always reveals. A person who has come into great authority and power is standing on a stage with full spotlight. As the years, sometimes just weeks, go on, no inner flaws can be hidden. Very few cover-ups possible. Their strengths, and what kind of strength? Their weakness, where it is the weakest. Their gifts, their flaws, their wounds. What effect is this having on these inner flaws? Have you ever seen a loaf of bread? The first few pieces, a sliced bread, the first few pieces you take out are just fine and full and strong. And then as you go deeper into the loaf, a kind of hole begins, like a bubble that formed in the dough. And the hole gets bigger and bigger and runs all the way through the dough. And a leader, whether dictator, king, president, chairperson, pastor, doctor, if there is that empty spot inside, it will begin to show itself always as the gift of power goes on. Now, I would say mostly the flaws, the wrong kind of strength, the wounds, the inner vacancy, really for most people, particularly those headed for great authority and power, shows up long before they come into power. To look carefully at what they've already shown as during the years of their rise. They usually will tell us, either by word or action, already a lot about who they are. Hitler, for example, wrote Mein Kampf, My Struggle, long before he came to full power. And in that book, he outlines his worldview and his agenda, open for anyone to read who really wanted to know what kind of person he was. I learned all I needed to know about Donald Trump way back when I watched his lies, his idiocy, his spite over Obama's birthplace. Remember his obsession with that subject. We learned then he was a liar, that he had chosen enemies out of spite, and how he would treat an enemy once he'd chosen him. It was publicly stated also for all the world to hear how he told us who he was when he bragged about his ability to grab women. Did anyone expect him to change? He was being very clear who he was. I think it's most wisest of us to believe people when they tell us, as they so often and usually do, who they are. And when they begin to show it through their actions. For example, a man or woman who says, I'm not really the marrying type, or I'm not ready for full commitment. Believe what they say. And in any relationship, whether an individual or a communal body, where there's any act at all of physical, emotional, or verbal abuse, when the signs begin of a need to control or extreme abnormal jealousy and possessiveness, never to dismiss this as just, oh, well, that happens occasionally or just once. They've already shown us who they are. Does that mean they can't change? Yes, of course, people can change. I've seen miraculous changes and transformations in my life, but only if the other person, or the communal body, if we're talking about that, if the other knows something is very wrong and really wants to look at it, to understand it, and to heal it. Only then can the change, basic change, come about. But insanely, Trump was elected for a first term. In his first administration, the symptoms he'd already shown the world were growing into fuller manifestation. The sick woundedness of his personality was coming forth more and more clearly all the time. And then 8 years later, re-elected. Maybe many people thought in this interim he's learned a lot. Maybe it won't be so blatant next time. It is far worse. It is way beyond now the manifestations of a wounded personality. This is disintegration going on right in front of our eyes. Disintegration and chaos projected on the rest of the nation and the world. Trapped in a bubble of his illusions, with a war going on now that he can't seem to stop, that he started, obsessions with his gilded arches and ballroom, obsession with his new granite helipad on top of the White House, obsessions with the reflecting pool. Who's running things? Are they, his aides, allowing him just to exist in his bubble of reality where he's nothing but his own face reflected back? Who's running things actually behind the scenes? Yes, the real question is, did this man learn anything in the interim is really the question. Have we, the electorate, learned anything? My answer is, oh yes, we are learning. We're learning the hard way, but we are learning. It is like a dangerous bacteria has entered our bloodstream in the nation, and our immune system is triggered off as never before with new strength, new power to fight back, to resist. I have every reason for hope when I see this strong immune system. Amazing thing to study, and whether in our bodies or a communal body. And what has been a great help to me in this time of a nation facing the particular kind of disaster now that we've never experienced before, at least in my lifetime. What's helping me now, and I think of the immune system waking up, really beginning its work, is what the great prophet Isaiah said 2,700 years ago, when his own nation had undergone disaster. Your builders outdo your destroyers. Your builders outdo your destroyers. And that is what I'm seeing. And I thank you for being with me today. It always feels so wonderful to share thoughts with you. Thank you.